Hey guys, I'm Elizabeth McCravey, a website designer and business coach for entrepreneurs and your host for the Breakthrough Brand podcast, the show that's all about pulling back the curtain on how to actually build a successful business. I don't skim the surface around here. If you want a deep dive into the nitty-gritty details of what it takes to run a successful business and stand out in a crowd, you're in the right place. After creating a multiple six-figure-a-year website design business in my 20s, I'm ready to share everything I've learned and everything I'm still learning because I believe the keys to building a thriving business should never be a secret. Here you'll find episodes that are actionable, direct, and fun, like friends chatting business over coffee, and a fresh, honest take on the reality of being an entrepreneur. If you're ready to master online marketing, branding, website design, mindset, and business strategy, then this is the podcast for you. It's time to build your breakthrough brand. Let's do this. Today, we're talking about boundaries and difficult conversations with team members and clients. Sounds maybe like a difficult and not so fun conversation, but I promise it absolutely is. Whether you're like me and you maybe have a small team of contractors you work with, or maybe you're wanting to hire your first or second contractor, or perhaps you don't have a team yet and you're working with clients though, this is for you. There's something in this conversation that I promise is going to help you in your business. I'm chatting with Jillian Dahlberry, and she is a pro at Teams and specifically works with VAs and OBMs. If you don't know what those words mean, we're going to get into that through her membership, Serve Your Heart Out. And she also works with CEOs on team building, hiring, and leadership. So she sees both sides of that. We talk about everything from boundaries to firing and hiring and team meetings, if our team members should feel like family or not, and how to do leadership well, how to know when it's time to let someone go, doing difficult conversations, boundaries, seriously, so much. Before I get into this conversation with Jillian, I want to just quickly encourage you to come join the Breakthrough Brand Podcast Facebook community. You may have not heard me talk about this. If you haven't, it's fairly new, so it's free to join, and it's where we take conversations like this episode with Jillian further. So you can ask questions to myself and other like-minded business owners. You can see behind the scenes of what I'm working on and learning in my business. This group is the place where I'm sharing like screenshots of what it looks like inside my ClickUp and like little videos of things like how to do something, taking an episode further. And you also might even meet like your next business BFF or your next team member in this group. So it's a very happening group. There's constantly posts in there, and I would just love to welcome you into our community, into a place where you can, again, connect with other like-minded business owners and ask your burning business questions. So go to elizabethmccravey.com/Facebook to request to join. It's absolutely free. Just send that request, or you can search like Breakthrough Brand Podcast group on Facebook and find it that way. But yeah, if you type in elizabethmccravey.com/Facebook, you can request there. I've linked that in the show notes, so you can just click that link and open up your Facebook app and request to join. I'd love to welcome you in. And also Jillian is in that podcast Facebook group, so you can ask some questions in there to her as well. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Jillian. All right, Jillian, welcome to the Breakthrough Brand Podcast. And it's so fun. We just did a podcast swap. And then prior to that, we talked for like 30 minutes where she was giving me all the advice on hiring stuff. And I feel like I got a little glimpse into like just how great you are at this when you were like, okay, tell me what you're looking for. Tell me what's happening. Tell me what's not working. And then you had all the answers. So anyway, I'm really excited to have you here. So welcome to the show. Will you tell everyone a little bit about who you are, what you do in your business, and who you help?
Yes, of course. So thank you for having me. It's been a delightful day to like podcast swap with you today. So I'm excited to share all this stuff with you and your audience today as well. So I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee with my husband and our two kids. We both grew up here. So we have, we've got roots here and we love it. I started my business because, well, I've had many businesses, but this business specifically is about helping CEOs and helping VAs and OBMs like connect together and find the best fit. I do that through my membership of Serve Your Heart Out, of coaching VAs and OBMs and training them on being proactive instead of just reactive. And I also still do work with CEOs as well as an OBM, and then do consulting on their teams and help them with hiring, kind of diagnosing what some issues are on their team, and then helping them figure out some next steps and moving forward. So it has been so fun, and I've made some pivots in the past couple of years, but I finally feel like I feel in a sweet spot of what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do it so well. And I love that you are helping like the VAs and OBM side, and then also with the CEO side. Like you see, so for everyone listening, it's like you really are seeing both. So I hope that there are some people who are virtual assistants or OBMs listening, but also if you're a CEO and you're like, hey, I'm looking to hire those sorts of things, or maybe you're hiring for, a marketing role, customer support, or that's the team member you're thinking of through this, Jillian has stuff for you there. Real quick though, for people who don't know what an OBM or a VA are, let's just quickly define those terms since that is like your background.
Yes, let's chat about that because there's so many terms.
Yes.
So a virtual assistant is a VA. And then an OBM is an online business manager. An OBM can come in many forms. I feel like there's probably more terms that you'll see with that type of work, but it's really someone who's coming into your business and managing the day-to-day operations. They're executing less and planning more, and they have a hand in the strategy of your business as well. So a virtual assistant is going to be executing all of the tasks that pop up, the administrative things that you have going on, and an OBM is in a position to guide, train, equip the VA so that they have everything they need to be successful.
Yeah, I love that distinction because it's like similar but two different roles, and you can have both at the same time.
Yeah, and honestly, a virtual assistant could very easily move into an online business management role because the more that, and that's actually how I got started in the OBM world, is I was a virtual assistant for a client, and I just kept kind of like putting my hands in more things. And I thought, ooh, I really enjoy that. And I realized that I was good at all of those things. And then before I knew it, I was doing this higher level work, and then just pitched myself to my client and said, hey, I feel like this is the role you need in your business, and I feel like I'm the person for the job. And luckily she accepted. So a VA and OBM are like on the same track, and they are just different parts of the journey. And that's not to say that a VA needs to become an OBM or has to. It uses something different inside of you, the strategy side, the management side. And so if you are a VA and you're feeling that like that twinge inside of you of like, I feel like there's more, then an OBM may be a good role to move into.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, and I love that part of your story and that distinction. So okay, we're about to chat about navigating conflict, difficulties with team members or with clients, but more specifically focused on team. But for those of you who are like, I don't have a team, I don't even have any contractors I've worked with, think about all this through the lens of like the clients you're working with, because it's all about people communication. So there is a lot of overlap, but we're going to talk about this with teams. And to also define that real quick, a team does not mean they have to be a W-2 employee. We just mean someone who's working with your business. It could be a contractor that you're working with where they got their own business over here and you've hired them for a project, or it could be someone who is just ongoingly helping you in your business, like a virtual assistant or someone helping you in your inbox or social media management, like whatever it is. So Jillian, as business owners, when we think about this team relationship, how would you say we could set better boundaries and expectations and just better set ourselves up with the relationship with our team members to lessen difficult conversations and pain points in the relationship as we start working with them and ongoingly?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before I go into the answer, I want to mention these boundary setting tips are really applicable for any relationship. We're talking about it today in context of working relationships with clients, team, contractors, etc. But I mean, this is something that you could pull out and use in everyday life outside of your business. So for everybody who's listening, keep that in mind. But in order to set better boundaries, we have to teach people what we will and won't tolerate. So I don't love the word tolerate, first of all, but for all intents and purposes, it works. we have to communicate what our boundaries are to people. And I don't just mean communicating them in the sense of saying, these are my office hours. I mean, it's a continual conversation because Elizabeth, if you tell me that your office hours are between, and I'm using office hours as an example, but it could be anything. If you tell me your office hours are between 9 and 12 in the morning and I email you at 1 p.m., that doesn't mean that you email me back at 1 p.m. You wait until the next day at 9 to 12 to email me back. And those are little ways that we're communicating with people what we allow ourselves to respond to. And we are the ones that hold that. We are the ones responsible for communicating that, because I'm not going to think to myself like, oh, well, I can't email Elizabeth until 9 a.m. tomorrow. No, that's not efficient for me. So I'm just going to email you when I think about it. And then it's your job to say, okay, well, I'm not going to email Jillian back until I'm back in the office. So that's definitely a really, really important piece of setting better boundaries, is learning how to communicate them and really respecting them yourself. We have this idea that people should know what our boundaries are because we've put it on our email signature or we put it on our website or something like that. And it shocks us sometimes when when we share our boundaries and we put them in our contracts, we put them in all the places that we think are important, but people still don't quote unquote respect them. And I think the most important takeaway from that is that we can't expect people to remember those things all the time. We can't expect people to abide by them because they're not their boundaries. It's ours. So it's something that we have to hold close to us, and we have to implement things to show them that these boundaries are respectable. So our boundaries exist for us to respect them first and foremost, not other people necessarily. And when we respect our own boundaries, it removes us from being reactionary to what our clients need and positions us to respecting our own limits and living life accordingly in that way as well.
Yeah, I love that. And it's something you made me think about talking about that, particularly when we talk about boundaries with clients. I teach this in Booked Out Designer, but I think it is so common that we put something in our contract like, this is when I'll get back to you. These are my office hours. Please don't text me. There's things like that in there, but then you never actually verbally say that or say that anywhere outside of the contract. And a lot of people don't even read contracts. Like, they're just signing it, trusting that it's fine for them. And so we have to teach our clients that hey, I don't want you to text with me. And in addition to that, people communicate with us how we lead them to, especially in a client relationship and with a team relationship. So if you start with a team member, the normalcy that hey, when there's an emergency, you're texting them, or with your client, when you need them to send you their copywriting, you text them. They're going to think next time they need something from you, let me text her about that. It's starting from the beginning, the way you want that relationship to look.
Yeah, you're setting the tone, essentially. Yeah. And so, back to your original question on how we do that, what do we need to identify? What do we need to do to set ourselves up for success in this way? First thing is we got to figure out what our non-negotiables are in our business. We've got to figure out what is important to us. What impact do we want our business to have? Because those are all things that we have to protect. Those are all things that we have to put boundaries around that implement what we're talking about, what we're not wanting to answer people after hours, or wanting to protect a sacred time of day for us. We also have to know what our values are. And I feel like I talk about this a lot. So I personally feel like a broken record on this one, but I know a lot of people have an idea of what their values are, but if you ever put those on paper, because that is completely different. Because if you put them on paper, you're able to identify, okay, well, how does this value specifically get implemented in my business and how I set my boundaries moving forward? If we start with these non-negotiables, the impact we want to have in our business, and knowing our values, and we do everything based off of those things, then it helps us build out these safeguards that we need to put in place to protect our boundaries and protect these sacred places in our business. So in terms of setting better boundaries, if you could start there, that is the strongest way that you could move forward.
Yeah. And that's so huge, especially for, like we said, we're going to talk about client and team relationships, but yeah, especially when it comes to client relationships.
Yes.
When we think about the team side of things, especially, let's say we have been too lenient with a team member or overlooking something that we're like, this is not going well. And I've just been ignoring it because I'm busy with a launch, or like you've had too many other things you're dealing with. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, wait, this thing hasn't been working in this way. And I've never said anything about it. And, I need to set a stronger boundary or more clear expectations about it. What would you say our first step should be, and how can we like navigate those types of situations?
Yeah, I have been in these situations before on other teams. And first of all, I just want to approach this with empathy because it's really hard. It's not an easy thing to approach when you care about somebody and you've made the choice to bring them on your team and you've invested in them and you've poured resources, financial resources into them, as well as emotional and mental resources. And so approaching these situations can be really, really tough. But the first thing that I would say to do is give yourself grace. And I know that that sounds a little like, okay, fine, sure. But I think that that's the most important thing because you will not be able to approach any sensitive situation properly and kindly and clearly if you haven't given yourself grace first. Because a lot of times when these situations arise, we're thinking, oh man, like I've really screwed up here. I've either let this go on too long, or I have put myself in a bad position, or maybe I should have let them go, quicker, or, I've overlooked too many things. And so we put that pressure on ourselves to be perfect and to get it right the first time. And yes, could we have done better? Probably so. But just because you're giving yourself grace doesn't negate the fact that you can take a step to make a wise choice and move forward in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And it is like sometimes giving yourself grace, because it is so easy as business owners, you're wearing 1,000 hats to like miss something and not be
Yeah.
paying attention to all the things as much as we should be able to. With boundaries with team members, like I feel like a lot of times the impulse is like 0 to 100 when there's a problem of like, oh my God, this thing isn't working and I wasn't doing anything about it now and now I'm doing something about it. How can we avoid like going 0 to 100 and it being more like maybe slow and natural in the way you're dealing with something that's not working?
Yes. So I don't know if I actually recorded a podcast on this or if it's just still sitting in my queue as an idea, but I like to call it leadership courage. And basically, what that means is you're willing to be clear with your team as things arise. So, very rarely are you going to bring someone on your team that you're just like setting loose to do the things and you're not tracking what they're doing or you're not seeing the work that they're doing in some capacity. I'm not talking about micromanaging. Please don't do that. But I'm talking about like just having a handle, having a pulse on what kind of work this person is doing. I like the phrase clarity is kindness. If you're not being clear, you're not being kind. And so sometimes what clarity looks like is providing them with feedback. And ultimately, a lot of us, actually, none of us, nobody likes conflict. If you like conflict, you're probably not my kind of people. I think that the biggest thing with conflict is we have this idea that it's an argument or it's this negative thing, but really it's just saying we are here and we want to be here. So if we approach conflict in that way, we can then say, okay, well, I just need to provide feedback to this person to try to get them from here to here. It's just a roadmap. But I think what we miss is I don't want to oversimplify it either. That takes courage. It takes courage to be able to say, hey, this isn't what I had in mind exactly. So let's bridge the gap in communication so that I can be clear with you, which is ultimately being kind, to bring you from here to here.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And that is like, yeah. And that's the thing too. So many people on teams might not. Like, you might think they understand exactly what your expectations are or the needs are in the business, but if you haven't actually told them that, they're operating based on what maybe one of their other clients is like or what their past job experience was like. We're all coming in with like preconceived concepts around this, so we have to communicate it. When it comes to the hard conversations, how do we make sure we're showing grace to the team member or even a client through a hard conversation? And how do we make sure we're showing grace while still like holding to the expectation? And like, would you say within that, like a hard conversation of maybe like, hey, like this work performance is not working. Should that be over a face-to-face meeting? Should it be on like Slack or an email, or like what kind of setting would you say is most appropriate for that? Interrupting this episode with a suggestion for the small business owners listening. Ever wonder what you should do for healthcare when you and your spouse are both self-employed, so there's no work-provided health insurance to participate in? Well, when my husband Adam joined me in the entrepreneurial job space over 4 years ago, we joined Christian Healthcare Ministries instead of getting traditional health insurance. And it was the best decision for us, especially in these years of growing and raising a family while also running multiple businesses. CHM is a health cost-sharing ministry and is a faith-based alternative to health insurance. We did tons of research before choosing CHM, and if you know me and Adam, you know we are all about doing the math when making big or small financial decisions. And even though it's not insurance, CHM shares 100% of eligible medical bills, which is more than the typical 70 or 80% of medical bills paid for by insurance companies. All sharing is determined by the CHM guidelines, which you can check out before and after joining. And for the mamas and mamas to be listening, you truly cannot find a better healthcare option for maternity care. I had a vaginal delivery and a C-section and birth center care and hospital care between my 2 pregnancies and births, and it was all 100% shared for. And outside of birth, we've had our share of emergency room visits and procedures as a family, and those costs were all shared by members at Christian Healthcare Ministries, leaving us only paying our monthly contribution. CHM is less expensive month to month than insurance, and because there's no network, you can choose your care with whichever providers best fit your family. I seriously just cannot recommend Christian Healthcare Ministries enough. You've got to check them out. Go to elizabethmccravey.com/CHM for more information. Also putting that link in the show notes, elizabethmccravey.com/CHM. Now back to the episode.
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think that it varies. And I don't think that you can categorize it as like, well, this has to be on Zoom or this has to be via Slack or whatever. I think that if you're letting someone go, I definitely feel like that needs to be face to face. And I think that's a non-negotiable. That's just out of respect. Mm-hmm. But as far as providing feedback to people, I don't think that we need to overcomplicate this. I think that the sooner we can communicate it, the better everyone's going to feel. And in order to provide grace to that person, I think that, again, we can't give grace if we don't have it, right? So if we're not accepting that for ourselves, we're not able to like give that to other people. And so I know that we think about grace too as this like big spiritual word. And I am a Christian. I run my business on faith-based gut and heart and all of those things. So like I do say it in terms of from a faith perspective, but I also say it in like a real life application. Grace is being able to be kind and be clear. It's not just letting people get away with things. It is communicating things in a way that makes them feel seen and heard, while also being honest. And so in order to have these conversations, these hard conversations, and do it well, I think you've got to start, instead of deciding like I think that your gut and how you run your business will decide how you communicate it. But I think what matters the most is less about the medium and more about the feeling behind it, the heart behind it, and how you communicate that. So I always tell people to start with a script, like hands down. It's okay to draft something to say, and it doesn't make it less personable. It doesn't make it emotionless or anything like that. What it does is it helps you remove some of those things that you're feeling that are maybe not healthy to project or put on other people. It helps you process all of that beforehand so that the black and white facts of what you need to communicate actually come out clear. And I want to be clear too, emotion is not bad. Like it's important to be yourself. I'm a very emotional person too. So like I tell people all the time, we need to affirm the gray and act on the black and white. So, in every situation, whether it be internal dialogue or dialogue with a team member, we need to affirm the gray. The gray are the feelings. We need to say, okay,
Yeah.
I see where you're coming from. I understand all of these things. I am seeing the way that you feel. But here are the black and white facts, the data that we take action on. The truth here, the black and white, is that maybe this task wasn't completed in the way that I intended for it to, or maybe the SOP wasn't followed exactly how it needed to be. And that's black and white data. So we can communicate that in a loving, grace-filled way by being clear. And I think that it goes back to the script. The only way to be super clear is to get everything out and go through multiple drafts and figure out what the goal is for that hard conversation, like what should the outcome be, and identifying that before you even enter it.
Yes, so good. And I think it's helpful to not assume and to ask questions to that person, because sometimes we might think, oh my gosh, I would have done it this way. They did it that way. This must mean X, Y, and Z about them or about me or about what they think about this business.
Yes.
In reality, it's like if you ask the question of like, hey, why did you do it this way? You might have a completely different perspective after having that conversation.
Yeah, and I even challenge that verbiage, because sometimes if you come at it, especially if you're not face to face and people can't read your tone of voice, if you say, why did you do it this way? Sometimes that can be taken the wrong way. So a better way to say that would be, help me understand why you did it this way or chose to do it this way. Help me understand where your mind was at so that I can help guide you to a better solution.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And something I want to add to like this kind of part of the conversation that's been really helpful to me in managing team members is talking about what the business needs versus what I need. For a lot of people listening, we are personal brand businesses. Your business might be your name. And even if it's not your name, you're used to doing this alone for so long. And so it's like you're used to everything being like, you need this. You're the direct person they're talking to. And so we can be like, I need you to do it this way is what we want to say. Whereas I'd be curious what you think, Jillian, but like, I think it is more kind, clear, all the things to say the business needs this versus it being all like I in the conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that is a very important realignment to say, like, this is not about me. This is not a personal, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. It's about the betterment of the business. And a way to approach that is by reminding them, like, we have the same goal here. Our goal is to, and it goes back to like the mission of your business and your non-negotiables and your values, is to say, like, my goal is to, or our goal as the business is to do X, Y, and Z for these particular people. And so if you approach it that way, you can then say, this way of executing this particular set of tasks would best serve our audience by doing this, And so that way you're also taking it, again, you're affirming the gray, but you're acting on the black and white. You're able to say, like, it's true that our client base or our audience needs X, Y, and Z. So in order to give that to them, this is the best way. This is the way that they've communicated with us. That is the best way to give that to them. And so that can also back up the things that you are communicating with this team member for like how to do it in a specific way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. With all that in mind, if it is like what we're doing of like communicating conversations, and you maybe had a lot of conversations and you're at a point feeling like the relationship needs to come to an end, maybe talking both about team members or like an ongoing client relationship where you're like, they're not respecting my boundaries, this is not working anymore. How do we navigate like firing someone, which is also weird when it's a contractor situation because that feels different, right? But that's the reality for like this online business space for most people. So how do you recommend navigating that well, making the decision, knowing that that's the answer versus like one more conversation?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I have experience in both of these areas.
Yes, tell us your stories.
Yes. Well, I think that it all, again, I don't want to say this flippantly because I want people to understand that these situations are really difficult and they are impacting people's lives and they're impacting people's income and they're potentially impacting their livelihood. And they may not have the same perspective that you do about business or faith or all of those things. So sometimes it can be hard to communicate really hard information to people who may not have the same perspective as you do. So we need to remember that their reactions are not a reflection on us or our business. It's a reflection of what's going on in their hearts. And that is going to release a level of pressure and a level of responsibility from us that we can sometimes internalize. Like if we let someone go and it doesn't go well, like, oof, that's something we carry with us and we think about it. I will say in the last person that I had to let go was an employee. And that was probably the hardest one because I had invested a lot of time and a lot of care. And, you see people on Zoom too. You see their family. You get to know them to a certain extent. And it's just really, really difficult to cut ties in that way when you've built that personal relationship. And I don't think that I do this perfectly. It never feels like you've accomplished it or mastered it in the moment. It never feels that way. But the most important thing that you walk away with is that you've made the right decision for the business. You've made the right decision for that person as well, because I think if it's the right decision for your business, you can trust that God's going to take care of them and it's going to be the right decision for them too. So again, this is really, really tough stuff. And I am a very empathetic person. So I just have to say, like, if this is something you're going through or have been through or considering, I see the struggle in that and I see you in that. It's just really, really tough. So again, lots of grace for you and for them throughout the conversation because it's not going to feel easy. It's not going to feel good. No one's going to walk away saying, oh, thank you for being so honest with me. And I just really appreciate it because now they're out of a job. I mean, nobody willingly is like, I'm just so glad we had this conversation.
Yeah.
So it's just really tough. But I think the most important thing that we forget, especially as leaders who are busy, is we have to make sure we're not ambushing people. We've got to have conversations that back to that leadership courage. We've got to have conversations before the toughest conversation about the conflict here, right? About the conflict of being here, but needing to be somewhere else. And so before you let go or say goodbye, there needs to be these prior conversations with clear facts of where the conflict lies. Because ultimately, we started working with this person for a reason. And we need to honor that by seeing if it's just something we can work through, by making things clear, by identifying the conflict and see if we can take steps to get to where we need to be. And if it's not going to work out, that's okay. You can still honor both people and move on with respect, even if you disagree.
Yeah. And for people who did not listen to that fully, rewind because that is so like what you just said, we need to remember, and it's so hard to do this well. And you're right, no one gets fired and says thank you typically, unless they also are ready to leave, which is another different conversation. But I love what you were saying about not ambushing people. And I have made my own mistakes that are conversations for another day that I probably would not even share in this podcast anyway. But when it comes to like this part of team stuff, but I did have a situation once where I feel, when I look back, and even in the moment, it felt that way a bit, that I was like ambushing in a sense because I was keeping all the problems with how it was going to myself. Which,
Yeah.
and that's bad. That's why we're saying we got to communicate. You got to figure out how can I like communicate what the expectations are, ask questions, and like y'all work towards a good resolution because you did hire this person for a reason. Interrupting this conversation with a quick thing I think will totally interest you. So at the end of this episode, you're going to hear Jillian share that she's a template customer of mine, and she uses the very popular Gabby template. The Gabby template is one of my personal favorites, and when people ask me like, hey Elizabeth, what template of yours would you use for your own website? The Gabby template is often my answer. The Gabby template is a full show it template with the option to add on podcast pages and a sales page too, so you really can get like the full built out website experience with this template due to these add-ons. And the vibe of the template is polished and professional, but with a lot of zing as well through color and fun typography, and also like unique layouts that you can really customize to fit your business. It's mocked up to be for a personal trainer or fitness coach, but it's used by such a wide variety of businesses like Jillian over here, who is a VA and OBM coach. There's also business coaches, life coaches, other types of service providers, counselors, ministries, copywriters, so many people using this template because it really can uniquely transform to what you're needing. The Gabby template also won first place in the Show It design competition when it launched among over 30 other Show It templates that were all built with the coaching, consulting industry in mind. So anyway, check out the Gabby template, elizabethmccravey.com/Gabby. I'll put that link in the show notes as well. And you can use the discount code BB Podcast, short for Breakthrough Brand Podcast, for 10% off the Gabby template or any other template. Now back to my conversation with Jillian. I had another situation once where we both felt it was time, like it was not working out after having a whole lot of conversations. And I think that felt actually pretty good for both of us, even though it still sucks in its own way. But that is like, I literally have those two like complete opposite spectrums where it's like, once I was like, it was out of the blue, and another time where it was like, hey, we've been talking about this for a while and we both are agreeing that this is not going to work out. So you live and you learn through those. The second one for me, where it was like more conversations, came after I learned like from doing it the wrong way. So yeah, I love that. I'm not ambushing and seeing if there's a way to like work towards it working, and thinking back to like, hey, when you interview that person, maybe even go reread their original application and be like, why did I end up like wanting to hire this person from that? And like seeing if you can find some stuff back in that set of things. A question for you that goes along with this, that is something, it's so hard to navigate as a business owner, I think personally, but balancing being friends with our team members while also leading well. Like, what do we share and don't share? Like how, and you know, there's people who like to embrace team where you refer to it all as a family. You know, what would you say about all that? And how do we, especially like in the personal brand space, I feel like that becomes even tougher because it's like, you might, like for someone like me, it's like I'm podcasting, I'm sharing a lot of my life other places in addition to with my team. So how do you balance the friendship while being a leader?
So yeah, I feel like this is really tricky. And I feel like it's tricky not in terms of giving advice on it, but more so in terms of my experiences, because I love hard. And when you run a business that is based off of what you're good at and what you're passionate about, your business is your baby. And as you bring people into it, it does feel like a family. It feels like, oh man, they are like on this train with me, and we are all like making impact together. And so naturally, that feels like a family. If you bond with people in that way. So, you know, a lot of my clients have become really good friends. My virtual assistant is like, we have become closer friends over time, and it's just been incredible. We've gone on retreats together. We've done other things, and so it's really difficult when you have to have these hard conversations and when you potentially have to let them go or anything like that. But when they, especially like when they have a hard day, like if they have a hard day in their personal life or in their business, I find myself like wanting to fly across the country and just like treat them to lunch or like send them a Starbucks gift card. I do that all the time. I don't fly across the country all the time, but I send them Starbucks gift cards all the time, just to like let them know that I'm thinking about them and that I care about them. And so like when you have someone working in your business, they're investing their heart with your business too. So there's just naturally that connection of friendship and that family type feeling. Okay. And so my advice is not to conform to what the culture or traditional business advice would tell you.
Mm.
I have heard a lot of you have to be hard or not to get emotionally involved. And I'm not saying that that's not applicable in some cases, but I guess my belief around this lies within what I feel like God calls me to. And that is to love and honor people well. I feel like He has personally equipped me in specific ways to do that for people. And so if I feel that gut feeling to pray for my client or pray for my team member, I will do it. And
Yeah.
that's something that, I know better than to tell the Holy Spirit no. Let me just tell you. I've lived too much life to say no to Him. But like sometimes it's just also being a container for their struggles. And sometimes it's leaving it alone and just, doing our work really, really well and just praying for them behind the scenes. Or like making sure that they don't have to worry about anything upcoming. Like, for example, if my virtual assistant was having a hard time at home, maybe she needs me to step in and take care of some of those things for her. Or maybe she needs another team member to step in and take care of those things for her. If I know that that is going on, I can orchestrate that. I can plan around that. I can be sensitive to that and empathetic and just take care of it for her so that she's not feeling pressure behind certain deadlines and thinking that she's letting me down because she's going through something. And every situation is different. Like, that's why I think it's super important to be yourself and to lean on who you are as a person. And also, I mean, a huge reason we start our own business is so that we can build the narrative of our lives to honor what we feel called to and what we feel passionate about. So if you're ignoring that because of the fear of being hurt or hurting someone, then you're doing everyone a disservice.
Mm.
We've got to show up as our imperfect selves and serve well. That's the only way that we serve well is by showing people that we're human too, And when we don't hit the mark every time, that's okay. We just have to accept grace that's freely given to us and extend that to other people.
I love that so much. Yeah, that's great advice. And you're right that it's not, we can build our business however we want. And I think so often in the online industry, and this is, some people are going to disagree with me on this, but like, I love the book Traction, for example. A lot, you hear that on just about every podcast, people being like, traction this, traction that. That's a book by Gino Wickman about the EOS entrepreneurial operates. This is what it's based on. That stuff's great, but it's not really necessarily built for our types of businesses all the time. And I think sometimes we can get too focused on like, okay, what are these giant corporations doing? And I should do the same thing. And it's like, you can run this however you want to run it. So I love that kind of that freedom to take what you want, leave what you don't when it comes to team. One question I have for you, for someone listening who's like, yes, Jillian, I love that you were able to hear that your virtual assistant is having something challenging going on at home, and you can like then say, okay, here's what I'm going to do to like navigate that with you. What, for the people listening who are like, I don't even know what's going on with my team. Like, I have no idea what's going on at home. Like, what would you say to them to like maybe remedy that and like create an environment where maybe you do know a little bit more about each other? And within virtual team, even that's a bit of a challenge. There's no water cooler, snack room type of chit chat happening.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I think to myself, like, man, my boss needs to get a water cooler or like and fill it with wine or something in the corner. No, I love that question because it makes us think how we can build a stronger company culture. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice by not calling our business a company if we're working with people, because the way that we respect our own boundaries and the way that we communicate our values to other people, that translates into how we build our team culture. So if you are not meeting with your team on a regular basis, you need to be. If it doesn't have to be every week, it doesn't have to be for a full hour. It could be 15 minutes once a month. I don't care. You just have to connect with them, and you have to be willing to ask important questions. Like questions about what a tip that I give people is, if you are starting a team meeting, if you're just building your team for the first time and you're like, oh, how do I even like orchestrate a team meeting? This feels so nerve-wracking. The things that you need to ask them are like, not limited to business stuff. It's what is a win for the week? What's a challenge for the week? Or what's a win for the month? What's a challenge for the month? And what's a question you have? Like, you can ask me anything, and don't limit it to business stuff. Allow it to be personal. One thing that I like to do is when someone starts working with me on my team, or on other teams that I help manage, I have them fill out this onboarding form that actually asks them questions about themselves. Like, what's your favorite store? And these are very surface level things, right? But it's like, it helps you get to know them as people. A really important question on that list is, what's your love language? And how do you like to be rewarded? Because some people are like, honestly, if you tell me thank you and that I'm doing a good job, that is enough. But maybe it's like supporting things that they love. If they are really into, I don't know, knitting, maybe you get them a gift card for to a knitting store nearby, or get to know what their favorite coffee shops are, get to know what their favorite stores are. You can actually learn quite a bit about a person by asking those questions. And then that will help you cater the way that you talk to them as well, and the questions that you ask them on a regular basis. You also need to I have a podcast episode about this, about how to build a team and company culture. So I want people to go and listen to that on the Gracefield CEO podcast. But ultimately, what we're doing by asking these questions is we are bridging the gap. If we think about conflict of like, if you don't know your team at all, but you do want to get to know them, then you're at point A and you want to be at point B. So what are the steps you can take to get there, right? And then asking these questions is going to help you know how to love them well and honor them as people. If you know that they're a homeschool mom, then you know that they are somebody who really values being present in that season of their kids' lives, and values being able to teach their kids. So maybe you ask, how is homeschool going? Or what are your kids learning right now? Or what's your biggest challenge with homeschool? I feel like everyone these days knows someone who's homeschooling. So maybe you can say, oh, my friend was telling me the other day that they're doing X, Y, and Z in their classroom. And it's just conversation. You have to be able to open that door, but it starts with you. It starts with that leadership courage of being able to take the step and make the initiation of like, I want to get to know you. I care about you. And even if you are just in my business to check my inbox, you're still a human being, and that matters.
Yeah, I love the way you said leadership courage, because it can feel intimidating of like, you're like on the meeting, you're like, wait, like you were saying, you don't know what format to do a team meeting in. And you might feel like, okay, we got to get straight to business. Like we're on the clock. Like, let's just skip all the personal stuff.
Because you're paying them too,
yeah.
right? So we overthink that.
Yeah. And so asking ourselves like, okay, how can you see this as like, a meeting with any other person, and like adding in some of those personal touch things. I agree. That's like so super helpful. And I wanted to share too, because you're right, like, so you've said so many smart things, but like, making sure you're regularly meeting with your team, that is a huge one. And I will admit, it can be hard to be consistent with that unless you put it on the calendar, because you have so many meetings with potential clients, your clients, podcast interviews, like all these different things you're doing, that you could end up in a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, it's been 2 months and I haven't met with this team member, especially when you have more and more team members being added who you're trying to regularly meet with. So something I've done that has been extremely helpful, that I actually implemented, I guess, at the end of last year, but I'm like, a few quarters into it now. I schedule all of the team meetings, our group meetings and one-on-one meetings, months in advance. Like I'm talking like 6, I think I did this year, I did in January all the way through the end of June. So that many months. It's all in ClickUp. Everyone's on the right meeting. There's a consistency of it, of like, hey, it's, every first Monday of the month or whatever it is. You could pick whatever you want there, but put it on the calendar and then y'all can adjust as needed. So if you get to a meeting where you're like, hey, we actually don't need a team meeting this month because there's not anything to talk about, then you can cancel it. But that way you're, like you were saying at the beginning, like being proactive instead of reactive. In that case, you're not having to be like, oh my gosh, I haven't met with someone forever. Let me message them. We need something on the calendar this week because there's all these things to talk about. So that's really helpful to me. And I do my kind of flow right now that I feel like has worked well is I do a one-on-one meeting with 3 key team members once a month. And I do them in a 2-day period. So it's like I meet with 2 of them on one day, 1 of them on another day. And then we do a team meeting every 3rd week. So a little more frequency than once a month. But that's been a good flow and it's all on the calendar. And in addition to that, another like random tip I think is helpful to like know what's going on with your team. We do a Slack check-in every Monday of like, what are you working on this week is one of the questions. Is there anything you need from me is another question. And then, or from another team member, but in my company situations, mostly someone needing something from me right now. And then the final question is, what's going on in your life this week? Is there anything that we could pray for or like anything you're excited about? And it's so shocking how many times like I'm learning so much information from that Slack answer that then we can like check in on and ask questions about or talk about in a team meeting. Like one of my team members is currently becoming a foster parent. And it's like, that's really exciting. And I probably wouldn't have known that if she hadn't have put it in like our Slack channel. So
yeah, and that's a big life thing,
yeah.
but not as something that would like come up in a wins challenges necessarily in a team meeting. I love that because Slack was another tool that I see people using a lot because it's a place for that daily communication, that daily conversation. If someone's going through something or if they've got something big coming up in their personal life that week, like, and you know that maybe they have a lot on their plate, a really great question to ask is what looks like help to you right now?
Oh, that's a good
Because it
question.
may not be anything you can do, right? Help may not look like you taking anything off of their plate. So if you just assume that that's what you should do, that's not always the most helpful thing. So by asking, you're clarifying what actually is helpful to them.
Yeah, that's an excellent question because a lot of times too, depending on what the thing is, you might be like, I actually need to work right now because I need that distraction. So you taking stuff from me
Absolutely.
is actually a disservice or whatever it is. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I feel like I could ask you a million more questions about all this, but I want to kind of close this part before we go into rapid fire questions. I want to ask you for someone who's listening who feels like they're not great at setting boundaries or navigating difficult conversations. They're just like, I suck at that. I don't feel like a leader in my business. I feel like a solopreneur. I don't want a team. I'm bad with client communication. What would you say to them and what advice would you give?
Well, it's a myth that anyone feels like they're winning at setting boundaries. I mean, that to say that anyone is I feel like there are people who think that I'm really good at setting boundaries, and I have worked on this a lot for myself and in my business, and so it has become easier for me to do that. But does it feel like I've just like really gotten that perfectly? No, it never does. And so if you're feeling like you're doing it wrong, at least you're doing it. So give yourself some credit there. Don't feel like just because it doesn't feel like you got it perfect that you're not doing a good job. It's a skill, it's something
Yeah.
you've got, it's a muscle that you have to strengthen in your business and in your personal life to be able to even like feel confident and have that courage to do it. So the advice I have is to be willing to stick it out. Keep doing it. I feel like it takes, or the last 3 years of my life have been some of the most uncomfortable in terms of honesty and boundaries and navigating conflict. But showing up every day, no matter what, makes the difference. Just being willing to show up in whatever capacity that I have to give. And we don't have to choose the situations that we find ourselves in. Sometimes things happen to us, right? We don't always get to choose what happens, but we have a choice in how we manage it. And so I encourage people that if they set a boundary and they got a little bit of pushback from that, then it's probably that is actually a sign that it's working, right? We're not always going to get people being so courteous and saying, "Oh, I'm so glad you told me not to do X, Y, and Z." That's just not realistic. People don't operate that way. They are more inclined to be like, "Ugh, I'm so annoyed by that. That's not convenient for me," even if they respect you.
Mm-hmm.
But again, people's reactions are very much about how they're feeling and what's going on inside of them rather than it is about you. So if you are feeling like it's not working well, that's not true. If you are showing up every day, you are doing exactly what you're supposed to do.
Love that. Such a good thing to close on. Okay, I have some rapid fire questions for you to kind of to officially close us out. So 3 different questions. One, okay, we didn't even talk about this. We talked about this when I was on your show, that you use the Gabby template from my shop.
Yes.
And your site's currently under construction, but I got to see it and it looks really great. So yeah.
I know, you had a secret sneak peek, which I'm hoping that by the time this airs, the whole world can see it. I guess I need to get my tushy moving on that.
Yeah, I think you'll be having it live by the time this airs. But yeah, so for anyone though who's like considering a template from my shop, what would you say to them? And just like, template customization thoughts, like all those sorts of things.
Yeah, well, I feel like, how much time do you have? No, I'm just kidding. I come from a background of design. That's what my degree is in. I went to college to be a graphic designer. And then by the grace of God, have just moved into a completely different space. But because I have that background, it's like I can't unsee good design, or bad design. And so it has always meant a lot to me to show up professionally in that way, probably to a fault of, overthinking it to some extent. But what I have loved about the M Shop templates is that, and I had like the hardest time choosing between them. I was like, can I just have them all? But what I've loved about them the most is that it's almost like ready-made professionalism for you, but it's incredibly versatile. So like, if the template itself doesn't fully align, like if one section doesn't apply to my business, I can just hide it. But it's not gone. Like it's not deleted. It's so versatile to what you need it to be. And I also feel like the M Shop templates are really intentional because, and Elizabeth, you do this in all aspects of your business. When I think about one thing, like I come to your shop saying, okay, I need a website template. Well, you don't just give me your website template. You also give me a coupon code for your website template, and you give me a quiz so that I know which one's the best fit for me. Then you also give me a course on how to actually do the thing. And it's like, oh, I thought I was just signing up for this one thing, but I get 10 other things. And it's just like a very intentional process that I felt very cared for throughout it. And so not only does it look amazing, but it feels good because I feel empowered in customizing it to my business.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I love that and love that it's suited you well and been a good experience. So yes, everyone check out your website and check out the templates. Love it. Okay. Let's see. Final rapid fire question.
Okay.
In the last few years, what have you become better at saying no to?
This is really hard for me. And I will tell you, I am a people pleaser. I'm a recovering people pleaser. Let me position it that way. And I'm honestly in a season of quitting because I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. I'm a classic, sign up for all the things, even like the simple things, right? Like classroom mom, I'll bring all the important things and the homemade things to daycare or whatever it is. I'm always volunteering for things because I love people and I just want to help them. And it's like, it's just like a part of who I am as a person. So what have I become better at saying no to? I feel like I'm still learning what I need to say no to, but it goes back to those non-negotiables and values of my personal life. And I would say the muscle I have strengthened the most as far as saying no is saying no to meetings on specific days. I protect my Mondays with everything I have because I know that, especially as a 2, if I get moving and helping other people, I've lost myself by the end of the day. I've lost control because one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And it's just ingrained in who I am as a person to overgive. And overserve. So when I think about what I need at the top of the week, it's giving my business the oxygen it needs. It's giving me as the business owner the oxygen I need to be able to fulfill all the needs for other people. And I'm not just talking about business. I'm talking about my family life too. Like Mondays and Tuesdays are chaotic in our house. It's like there's soccer, there's small group, there's taekwondo, there's all the things. And not to mention, my husband's a teacher and or and a real estate agent. So maybe there's a house that comes on the market that one of his clients wants to see, or maybe he's got an after school thing that he has to go to. And for when all of those things pop up, there's got to be margin there, and there's got to be priority around making sure that I have given myself and my business what I need, because by the time the week takes off, it is on its own track, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And yes, calendar stuff is such a thing to protect. Like,
Oh, yes.
and I love the concept you're saying, like you protect Mondays. Like that's a good boundary and it can help us in our businesses to like start the week off focusing on things we want to focus on versus like putting out other people's fires. So I'm with you on like, that's a thing I'm also having to learn of like, okay, what days am I willing to take meetings? What days am I not? And how's that fit into like family and home life and all that?
Yeah.
Well, awesome, Jillian. This has been amazing. I feel like I learned a lot, and I think our listeners did too. Will you tell everyone where they can find you and to connect with you about your podcast, services, all the things?
Yes. So my website, which again will be live, there's still a page open where you can find all the things, but hopefully you'll get to see the real deal. It's at jilliandalberry.com. The podcast is jilliandalberry.com/podcast, and also called The Grace-Filled CEO. And then I am on Instagram at Jillian Dalberry. I'm just on Instagram all the time. So I'm also in my DMs a lot. So if someone has a question about our episode or anything like that, like I highly recommend messaging me, and I would love to voice note back and forth and get to know you. So thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. This has been a blast.
Yes, I love that. Yes, send us a message and let us know about the episode. And yeah, check out your podcast. I'm a guest on it as well that may or may not have aired by the time this airs, but you'll be able to hear me on her show as well. So awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode all the way until the end. I appreciate you being here. And if you enjoyed this episode, then I want to invite you to check out my website template shop too. Over on elizabethmccravy.com, you'll find show website templates that are easy to use, strategically designed, and created to help you book more clients and customers. Maybe your current website is really boring. Maybe it's a challenge to update, and maybe even it's that thing that you really feel like is just completely holding your business back. Your website needs to be strategically and intentionally designed in order for it to convert your viewers into raving customers, and that's exactly what my M-Shop templates do. So these are pre-made show it website templates where you can plug and play your content into it with ease and then get started with a website that's designed to actually help you make more money. These templates are designed to be SEO friendly on the back end, and they're not just pretty, but they are very strategic and with all the strategies I teach on this podcast. And best of all, they're easy for you to set up all by yourself. So shop them at elizabethmccravy.com/shop and come join the M-Shop family of hundreds of happy customers. And as an added perk, you can use the code BBPodcast at checkout to get 10% off any template as a thank you for being a part of the podcast family. So that's BB Podcast for 10% off any template over at elizabethmccravy.com. And if you love this podcast, don't forget that you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts so that you never miss an episode, and leave a rating and review for the show wherever you're listening. Share it with a friend, share it on Instagram or Facebook. That's a great way to support the podcast and get the word out. All right, I'll be back next week with another new episode.